sending people with guns.
I didn't realize I was so captivating.
How are you guys so deep into my content?
Everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi.
All right. G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name is Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Not too bad, Pietro. What's happening?
Nothing much. We're gonna for the first time, really delve into what some collectivism is today. We often talk about, this is collectivitis, we dissect the disease, and then we broadly talk about libertarianism. But today we're gonna really chomp down on one of the biggest purveyors of collectivism that there is, and that's the education system. You're a product of the education system, Max. What do you think of the education system?
In what respect am I a product of the education system?
Well,
somebody who despised it.
Well, someone who went to school. Every student despises the education system when they're in it. That's
for different reasons.
Yeah, well, most of them just hate authority because they're all libertarians when you're a teenager. Every teenager is a little anti-authoritarian.
But it's a lot more innocent. It's a lot more pure. You just hate being told what to do. It's not because you've lived through governments fucking you around. And
yeah, you hate being told what to do, and it's slowly stamped out, over the course of high school, especially. And by year 12, you're an upstanding citizen, and you're willing to do whatever it is that the powers that be tell you.
Or like me, you just despise what the teachers are telling you and the agendas they're pushing. But instead of fighting back because you're too young, you just stop caring about school.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. I wasn't. You don't have the ammunition yet to fire back.
Yeah, exactly. And
but
if you did, you just get kicked out of class.
Not necessarily. You just kind of get. Speaking from what I see now, if a kid brings up the opposing point of view, you just get kind of ridiculed with the most basic, mainstream status talking point, and because you don't have the ammunition, you just shut up at that point because an authority figure is telling you that you're wrong in a teacher, and so you think, okay, well, I've stepped out of line here.
Teachers and AI very similar.
How so? How are teachers and AI very similar?
Just programmed responses to your questions. You ask a difficult question, you get a programmed response.
Well, that's right. We the influence of AI is something that's very new, and also very new in schools. That's a whole other topic to what we're going to talk about today, but that is a really...
We're already getting distracted.
Yeah. That is a really interesting thing that maybe we can delve in another time. But what I was going to say was that unlike our teenage selves, we do have the ammunition today to fire back at the talking points that teachers have, but also broadly why education is such a fucked up system, which it really is. And it's when you break it down, it's quite systematic, and it's quite obvious as well why it is the way that it is. So in the past, we've kind of done a lot of episodes, with guests or with things that are happening recently. So today the view is to have more of an educational episode. Sometimes we gloss over some quite sort of niche and in-depth topics, as this is the point of view that we think, and we don't really examine why exactly it is that this thing is so messed up. And so that's something that I have, what I would argue is a very unique position, in that I am an ardent libertarian, fairly well read. I can tell you why. I have access to a lot of libertarian insights that come from following the ideology. And I also work in a school, and I work in a Catholic school, which means that it's over half of it is publicly funded money. So it basically operates like a public school without some, like the catchment areas thing doesn't apply to Catholic schools, but a lot of the rest of it applies to semi-private schools. And the vast majority of everyone today sends their kids to either a public school or a Catholic school or a semi-private school. It might be some other denomination. And so I'm in a very unique position to examine what the education system is and why it's so messed up from a libertarian standpoint. So, I don't know where to start. I suppose that the place to start. And you just chime in whenever you've got a question, Max. So maybe put your hand up. We'll pretend we're in class. You put your hand up. Our just listeners won't be able to see when you've got a hand up. They'll just hear an awkward silence when I'm waiting for you to ask a question. But our viewers will be able to see your hand up.
If I ask a difficult question, will you kick me out of class?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Awesome.
I'll just kick you off the call, and then I'll continue the rest of my lesson. It's
Perfect.
Just exactly the way I do it during the term is how I'm going to treat you today, Max. Okay, so basically the crux of it is that as and what I'm going to examine within the education system is going to be universities and high schools primarily, because primary schools I haven't taught in, and I don't really remember what it was like. I don't really remember what was being taught there from when I was there, so I can't really comment on it. But university, obviously, I went through the whole university system studying, teaching, and then the high school system is where I work in every day. So the first thing you got to do is you got to take a big step back. What is the state broadly from a libertarian point of view? It's this parasitic entity which exists at the expense of individuals. It doesn't provide anything. It's the only organization in the world that doesn't actually provide anything of its own, anything of value. It takes value from others and uses all of its power, which it continues to amass, in justifying its own existence and in legitimizing itself, in proving that it is necessary and required. And one of the best tools that the state has to legitimize itself is this alliance with academia. So academic professionals are an enormous subsect of society compared to what they would be within the free market, because there really isn't much of a market for academics in a world where there aren't regulations and requirements such as universities. So the state is largely what props up academics, and how it does this is through universities. So if you look at essentially what a university was historically, it was this place that you could go to for higher learning. If you were, usually it was relatively expensive because they would be operating within a more free market than what we have today. And so you'd only go there if you, one, had the money to be able to do it, and two, had a real sort of need for the university, because you're not going to spend this huge amount of money on something that is a waste. If you fast forward, universities have since then, first they had to come to terms with the information age. So universities no longer provide you some access to knowledge that is greater than what you can get outside of universities. Previously, you'd go to universities, you'd talk to your really intelligent professors, and compared to the broader population, and you'd have access to books, libraries, resources, science labs, whatever, all the rest of it that you couldn't get outside of universities. And that would mean that you had access to more knowledge. Nowadays, with the internet having literally all of the history of human knowledge at your fingertips, just about anything that you can learn in a university, you can learn at home by yourself, assuming that you have the correct amount of diligence and guidance in what to look at. And you'll probably get a far less propagandized view of the things that you're going to learn. So universities had to adapt, and they adapted with the help of the state. And what they became, instead of being this fountain of knowledge, is they would have gone obsolete, because if you're in an industry and you're looking to hire someone, most industries now that require university degrees, you could learn far more quickly and far better the industry if you went straight into the industry. TAFEs, if you ask to anyone who went to TAFE, they'll tell you this all the time. At TAFE, you learn very broad generic skills. And then once you get a job within, an apprenticeship somewhere, this is for trades, you learn a whole different set of skills specific to the job that you're actually going to do. And your time would have been far better spent without those years at TAFE, just learning the job that you're actually doing. The same with most university degrees. Teaching is no different. In teaching, if I had, instead of going to university for 5 years, had 2 years of just learning on the job in teaching, maybe first as an assistant teacher or something, I would have learned far more quickly all the skills that I use today, and 99% of the skills that I use today in my job are stuff that I did not learn at university. It's stuff that I learned from the actual workplace. So unis had to contend with this fact that they now are no longer the trove of knowledge that they once were, and they no longer actually provide anything more valuable. If the vast majority of industries, there are some specific niche ones where they do require a lot of prior learning before you can go into the industry. But they had to contend with this notion that no longer the trove of knowledge, and people can learn far better on the jobs themselves. So what they became, with the help of government and regulation, is this paywall and this time wall between someone being able to enter the workforce, where they have to go to university and pay this exorbitant amount of money and be subjected to this exorbitant number of classes, because otherwise no one would go to them. And this is how the state manages to forcefully, cause everyone to have to go to universities and everyone to have to pay for these university degrees eventually, although the government initially pays them for you, and then you pay back the debt through HECS here in Victoria, and keep all of these academics in jobs. And all these academics obviously are aligned with the state that employs them and gives them a reason for being. And so it's essentially this rort where they force you to go to university to be able to get a job through regulations, force you to pay all of this money, and the people in universities are directly employed by this system and therefore are likely to be perpetuators of the necessity and legitimacy of the state.
Just to go back a tiny bit, to compare universities to finding all this information online yourself, do you think a university would benefit in terms of guiding you where to go and what to learn? Or if you just to Google how to be a teacher, you'd just get this shitload of information and probably find yourself a bit lost? Or do you think creating almost like an online only university, maybe there's guides with this is the order of what you should learn, how to become a teacher, would that benefit instead?
Look, the structure is largely something that people cling to universities, but the structure is not difficult to find. I could right now go and look at a university course on teaching and tell you what each of the units outlines and tell you largely what they cover and be able to look up all those things myself. And if there weren't universities, it's not like other entities wouldn't crop up to either privately or open source publicly provide, hey, these are the resources that you would need to become a teacher in a specific job. Or broadly, if universities didn't exist and schools were themselves looking to have a certain amount of knowledge prior to entering the school to give you their, the apprenticeship or the assistant teacher role, they would provide you with, hey, here's a set of topics and readings that you need to do, and possibly they might impose some assignments that you do in your first couple of years rather than done through regulation. And more importantly than done through regulation and an exorbitant amount of money. It costs a ridiculous amount of money to go to university. And that's part of it, is because they have to pay all these lecturers and halls and professors and all the rest of it. And these people are forever aligned to them and will spew their propaganda because they're getting paid by it. Have a guess. So essentially, yes, universities are, that's kind of the crux of the point I was trying to get at, is that universities are this time wall and this paywall. And because they exist, the people who work in them are going to align with the views of the state. And they're going, a professor will definitely not even do this consciously, probably. They probably do it subconsciously. They've studied for 10 years at a university because they got told that was the thing that they needed to do. And then they're going to do their masters and their PhDs, and sometimes they're working as a professor while they're doing these things. So they've really immersed themselves in academia because they've been told that this is a valuable thing to have. Now, it's not really. It's largely not a valuable thing to have all this knowledge on a niche subject, unless you've got people who need to learn this to be able to do something else. And so these professors, full of self-importance and all the rest of it, are going to believe in the legitimacy of what they've learned and of what they've done. And they're not going to look to tear down the whole system because it's their whole life. It's
and
like
they're also internally, to themselves, they've got to justify this paywall and time wall you talk about.
Exactly.
Saying
and
that, though, saying that though, as someone who didn't go to university, I've spoken to lots of friends who have gone to university, and they do acknowledge it. Like, you know, what a waste of time, or like, you know, this took way longer than it needed to, or it cost me more than it needed to, and like, you know, placement crippled me.
Yeah. So yes, largely most people, and more now, people are realizing that universities are a waste of time. And these are people who go to university and then decide they don't want a job that requires a university degree. So yes, university is a waste of time for them, obviously. What's even worse is the people who knew what job they wanted to do, could have entered that workforce 5 years earlier, or at least 3 years earlier, or whatever it is, but went through and had to waste this time getting this degree and waste this money that they're going to have to pay back to get this degree, where they essentially learn nothing.
And the person who's jumped into the workforce and has 3 to 5 years of experience is leagues ahead of them.
Yeah, and so many in teaching. I mean, I did teaching as my degree, so I can speak primarily to that. Every single student, by far, the most valuable thing that a university does is it provides you with placements into schools, where you go into a school and you're a student teacher and you have a mentor teacher there with you, and you teach a class for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, depending on how long that particular placement is. That's by far the most useful thing that universities provide, and that's where you learn all of everything.
On that though, it's usually unpaid placement though, isn't it?
Yes. But yes, those are all unpaid placements. But the most useful skill that university provides is actually not anything the university provides. It's going into the school and doing it, which is exactly what you should be doing instead of going to university. Even if you have to do, say, a year, 2 years of unpaid work in a school to get your license, let's say, or for the school to allow you to then become a full-time teacher there. Let's say that's what you do. If I had done that, I would have, okay, let's say I do 2 full years, and compared to university, 2 full years of teaching, you've learned everything to at least have a base for being a teacher. If I do that, okay, 2 years of work that I didn't get paid for. Did I pay anything for it? No, I'm not going to have to pay to go to these schools and work for them. I get to enter the workforce 2 to 3 years before I would have if I'd gone to uni. And I don't have the debt of however many thousands or tens of thousands of dollars from going to university. So even if it were 2 to 3 years of unpaid work, it's still miles better than what universities provide. And it's what the free market would provide if it weren't for regulations stopping them. And it's what schools would want if it weren't for regulations stopping them. You can see now in Victoria, so post-COVID, there's a teacher shortage in Victoria. And so what they've changed is the regulations, so that now if you are a 4th year or 3rd year student studying teaching, you can enter the workforce 1 or 2 years earlier. Has the world come crashing down with these unprepared teachers entering the workforce? Of course not, because it doesn't make any difference whether you have that last year or 2 years of university study under your belt before you actually start teaching. The fact that there now has a shortage, so they have to ask people to work and it's all okay, is a testament to the fact that the last year, in fact, I would argue all 4 or 5 years of university, are useless in actually being able to do your job well. What counts in most workplaces is, workplace experience. And even if this is unpaid for a really long period of time, that's still way cheaper and way quicker than universities. So I suppose, yes, universities are obsolete, and they are a mechanism by which the state can then propagandize kids. And you see the stuff that goes on in universities. Just the other week at Melbourne Uni, they had the Marxist rally. Like, Marxism, an ideology that is dead, has caused death and destruction everywhere, caused 20 million dead in the Soviet Union, and has been completely, comprehensively dismantled as being completely unusable in the modern world, is being looked at universities and celebrated at universities, which are meant to be this place of higher learning and high intellect. It's absolutely bizarre. Only people who don't exist in the real world, judged by any real world consequences, could have this viewpoint. And that's exactly what university professors are, by and large, and exactly what university students are, by and large. They haven't experienced what the real world is, and they haven't learned what the real world is. They're learning this abstract, distorted view of what the world is.
Are they incentivized in any way or form to be pushing these ideologies, or is it just driven into them like over decades, and it's just like it's the Overton window, if you will, of political views shifting?
Yeah, well, they're incentivized by the fact that their job wouldn't exist if they weren't pushing these views.
Yeah.
Like Marxism is a statist view. It's an enormously statist view. It's the most statist you can get. The state controls everything. So the more, if you compare, statism versus libertarianism, the more libertarian your views lean, the less requirement there is for universities to exist at all, or certainly government subsidized universities. Universities are paid for entirely by government research grants, teaching grants, and the government subsidizing student loans and paying for them outright, and then the student pays them back. Without this, how many people are paying upfront for universities? Very, very few. And if universities had to compete for the people who are willing to pay for them upfront without any coercion or any government grant or anything, then universities would be providing a very different service. So all of these academics and all these people pushing these things know that, you have to push statism. You have to push, even if they aren't subconsciously aware of it, they know that their job comes from the fact that they are pushing big government views. And the government needs to pay for everything. And that's why I have a job, and a cushy job, and an increasing wage job, and have all this air of importance around me.
Two questions. So I want a little bit of insight into becoming a teacher at university. Can you give me a percentage of how much of it is like just general teacher stuff, like learning how to be a teacher, and how much of it is your specific topics or subjects that you would specialize in? So how many years did you go to uni for before getting a job?
So I went 5. I did a few degrees though. I did some writing and editing. I did a Bachelor of Arts, and I did a Bachelor of Education. So I can't remember exactly how much of it is how much of what. Broadly, what you learn in your education classes, like they are providing you with stuff that is at least tangentially relevant to a school. Like they'll talk to you about the curriculum. They'll talk to you broadly about the subjects. They'll maybe get you to do like a mock class example of what it looks like inside a class, where the other students pretend to be high school students or whatever, and you deliver a lesson. It's really sort of low key, low risk examples of what a school experience will look like, and teaching you skills that you will eventually experience in schools. But anyone who's a teacher will tell you that the most difficult and the steepest learning curve in their career, and probably their life, is their first year of teaching, your first year out, because it's in terms of how difficult it is compared to the university experience that you have of teaching. It's 5% compared to 100%.
It's kind of like anything in life. It's sort of like, for an example, if you're going on a holiday somewhere, you do all this research about this place, you get there, and you learn more in that first 24, 48 hours of being there than you did in weeks or months of researching and reading things. And yeah.
That's a really good paragon, like not paragon example, but comparison. The I'm an English teacher, everyone. Because the difference between learning university, what teaching is, and actually teaching is very similar to preparing what a holiday is and then going there and actually experiencing the thing. But with the difference that you are paying through the nose to do this thing while you're at university, and you'd be far better prepared if you were doing teaching, even if it's in a more or less stressed situation. Let's say your first year of teaching, and this could be imposed by schools in a free market. Like schools would want to not burn out their teachers in their first year, as often happens. So maybe your first year of teaching looks like you have 3 classes. You're not paid. This is your learning years. You do 2 years. The first year you have 3 classes. 2 of them are with an assistant teacher or a mentor teacher in the room with you. This lowers their workload. Mentor teachers would love to have a second person in the room, especially if they're long-term committed to being a good teacher. And you have 1 class that's just your own, and you learn all the things that are new and difficult and how to manage a classroom by yourself, but you're not learning it with 5 classes at once with a full-time load and also having to do extra requirement assignments that the government imposes on you, you're learning it in a low stress environment. And maybe your second training year is something similar. And these are all things that, these are just examples I'm pulling out of my ass, because it's what schools would automatically do in a free market if there weren't regulations. They wouldn't want to throw untrained teachers straight into the deep end and not pay them, because they're not going to stay. Who's going to stay? There's going to be a shortage of teachers. You'd want to provide an environment where the teachers can learn in a low stress situation and then gain the skills to eventually become a teacher. But yeah, so largely you're learning all the skills that are useful to being a teacher, with none of the actual impact or reality of what it means. And it's all 1 million times more useful when you learn it yourself in the class. You can't learn these things. By definition, you cannot learn how you're going to react in behavior management situations, or in conflict situations, or in situations where you're underprepared, or when the class has gone in a direction that you haven't foreseen or something. You can't prepare for these in a university environment. You have to experience them yourself, and you're just delaying those experiences from happening if you're putting this time wall, or this paywall in between.
Is there, or how do you change this from the inside? What can you do to influence change?
Okay, well, I will get to that. Hold that question. Make a note of that question and ask me it again, because I did want to talk. So that was broadly like the university, how universities work and everything that's wrong with universities. My experience with high schools is, because high school is kind of more pervasive in a sense, because everyone has to go to high school. High school is part of compulsory education. I think you have to go till year 10, and most people go till year 12, even if they do non-scored. So high school is kind of where the curriculum of what is imposed becomes so much more important. So if you think of your standard high school teacher and how they work, or your standard high school. So teachers are largely, typically they've all come out of universities, so they're probably left-leaning, but they're not necessarily. You don't have to be. There's nothing within the role that requires you to be left-leaning. I certainly am not. You go into a school, and whether that be private, semi-private, or public, the schools are completely socialized when it comes to the public sector. Most people send their kids to public schools, and they're mostly public socialized when it comes to even the semi-private sector. In a semi-private school, most of the students, most of the money per student comes from still the government, rather than teachers paying fees. So
let me just go back a tiny bit. In terms of teachers being left-wing leaning, and like that being, I'd say over 95% of teachers would be left-wing leaning. Where do you think that stems from? Is it because it's heavily unionized, the teaching industry?
You've brought me back to the point that I was making. Yeah, you're exactly well done, Max.
I listened for once. Paid attention.
Well done. Good student. Gold star. So yes, so the reason the majority of them come out of universities, a lot of them are already left-leaning, but all their incentives once they become a teacher is to be left-leaning, because so the school system is so socialized in both public and semi-public or private institutions, and unions have such a stranglehold on the education system. So, and this is true most of everywhere in the world, but definitely true in Victoria, where even if you're not in the union, you're in the union, because most teachers are in the union, and there will be a striking, or there will be some push for higher wages or whatever it is. So unions run the relationship between schools and the management, and the management for the most part is already pretty beholden to the government in terms of money anyway. So a teacher's wage is basically tied to what the public teacher's wage is. If you're in a semi-private or a private school, they match their teachers' wages to what the public school teachers get. And this is standardized. So there's actually no incentive to being a good or bad teacher in terms of money. You get the same amount of wages based on how long you've been there, rather than how good you are as a teacher. Already, this is a huge distortion of the market. There's no incentive for a good teacher to teach anywhere other than anywhere else, other than whatever other circumstantial reasons they'll come up with.
Well, we
no
spoke about this
incentive.
with Mayor a couple of episodes ago, that if if there was school choice, the shit teachers and the shit schools would have less students going to them because they wouldn't be getting the results that they're after. And you could have the better schools, if they wanted to charge a little bit more because they're doing a better job, then so be it. That encourages the shit teachers to do a better job and the shit schools to do a better job.
Correct. And as much as people pretend not to be capitalists, people are still governed by money, even so your teachers that teach in a public school still want to get a higher wage. I mean, they're not capitalists. Capitalism is evil, but they still want to be getting paid more money for what they do. So all their incentives are to vote in the party that will raise teacher wages by the most. Now, because it's a completely socialized system with no entry point for the free market whatsoever, the left-wing party, the Labour Party, is going to raise teacher wages by more than what the Liberal Party are. The only way the Liberal Party can raise more is by going more socialist than the Labour Party, which...
But it's also ironic that the biggest socialists, the biggest people against capitalism are socialists who have benefited from capitalism and have heaps of influence and heaps of money. Bernie Sanders, for example, has a fuckload of investment properties and is filthy stinking rich and is just pushing for socialism.
And well, that's right. It's when you look at where the money goes, it's completely, their views are tied completely to their own personal incentives. So the all teachers, regardless of whether they are left-leaning, right-leaning, woke, conservative, whatever, if they teach in a public, private, or semi-private school, because the wages are tied to what the public sector wages are, they have a direct financial incentive to vote for the party that promotes big government, because the school system is completely or almost completely socialized and completely unionized. So all teachers, if you're a new young teacher, if you're a young person, you graduate high school, you go to university, there's a financial incentive there for the professors to teach you statist, left-leaning Marxist things. Okay, you come out of that, you've maybe got a bit of a left-leaning inkling. But let's say you come out of that mostly neutral. You go into a school, you start teaching. Your financial incentives immediately are that the Labour Party needs to win and everything that goes along with it. Now, consider that applied to every single teacher in every single school everywhere. Yes, of course, there can be exceptions where teachers aren't affected by the financial incentives. And most teachers aren't even consciously doing it. Most teachers are just trying to teach what the best what they think is the best thing for their students. It's the entire system that's all around them that tells them that the best thing for their students and the best thing for them is to be statist and to vote left, because the left is doing the social justice things which are good for everyone, and it also happens to coincide with them getting higher wages. So why would they even try and scratch beneath the surface of that and realize that what it's actually doing is that it's indoctrinating the next generation to be more and more statist? And so, we think at the core of what is the harm of all of this statism being, perpetuated and cycled through high schools, then universities, then into teachers who then teach in high schools and then teach new kids and etc. What is this statism doing? What is the big negative impact of all this statism? And it's the fact that we now have, because of all this increasing government and increasing government spending on everything, is everyone is getting increasingly poorer at a rapid rate. Wages are no longer increasing with pace of what inflation is outdoing them, and the cost of things are exploding due to inflation. And this is all caused directly by government spending, because the government is emboldened by the fact that schools and universities are paid for by the government and have every incentive for everyone who works in them, have a direct financial incentive to promote the government, the view that government is good and that government propaganda is correct. So just to give you an idea of, and the curriculum is this is all without even looking at the curriculum.
So this is like almost forget the word I'm looking for. It's subliminal within the curriculum. Is this pushing for pro-government, big state? It's not necessarily like, teachers walking in. Today's topic is why we love the government.
Correct.
It's just so subliminal. So the curriculum is just feral, if you will.
Well, so far we've looked at the financial incentives, right? So far we've looked at why a teacher might be inclined to being more left-leaning or right-leaning. Now, and they're inclined to be statist because of the fact that their job depends on the state, and the increase in their wages depends on the state, and their self of importance and the time that they've wasted in this world on getting a piece of paper is guaranteed by the state. So they have every financial incentive and personal incentive to be statist, and they've been told by everyone in their life, in their education so far, that the state is good and holy and the bringer of all things good. This is all without even counting the fact that what teachers teach in schools, especially high schools, is the Australian curriculum. Now, the curriculum is compulsorily applied to every school, so you can't deviate from this. You can't be an independent school that doesn't have follow the Australian curriculum. It's not possible under the current system. You have to, if you want to, unless you're going to homeschool your kids. You can't create a micro school and deviate from the Australian curriculum. You can't create any school and deviate from the Australian curriculum. You have to teach this thing.
So,
this
thing
is
private schools as well?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
And this curriculum is determined entirely by unelected bureaucrats somewhere, appointed by the government to be the heads of education. Unelected bureaucrats that will last through this government and the next government, and that work completely independently of people's votes. So if people are completely furious with the things being taught in school, as was the case quite a lot during COVID, when parents saw for the first time the kind of shit that kids were being taught in schools and some stuff that maybe they disagreed with, there's no mechanism for them to vote someone else in to change this thing. There's no mechanism to change the curriculum from the public. It's compulsorily applied to every student that goes through the schooling system, and it is completely decided by unelected bureaucrats who work for the state. So to give you an example of some of the things that I personally didn't love about the curriculum when I was teaching it, I think one of the really emblematic areas of history, I teach English and history. One of the really emblematic areas of history to look at is the Industrial Revolution, because the Industrial Revolution, from a capitalist, Austrian economics point of view, free market point of view, is this period in history where humanity went from having really, really low standards of living, but due to entrepreneurialism and the free market and capitalist enterprise and innovation, and all kicked off by the invention of the steam engine, humanity's living conditions skyrocketed from really basic to incredibly high standards by comparison, and to the standards that we get to enjoy today. And so, when you look at it through this lens, the Industrial Revolution is the only reason that we can have this conversation, that I don't have to work 15 hours a day slaving away on a farm to even make sure that I don't starve for the next winter. It's the reason we have every creature comforter that we're able to afford, which kings of the Middle Ages, the pre-Industrial Revolution times, couldn't have had. We have access to things to a living lifestyle far greater than kings, queens, royalties, emperors, everything of the past. And all of this is due to the Industrial Revolution, the greatest increase in human standards of living ever. And if you look at the curriculum, the things that are the main sort of areas that they want you to talk about in the Industrial Revolution is, so let me have a look here. So describing the effects of factories, mines, and cities on the environment, outlining the growth of trade unions as a response to the effects of the Industrial Revolution, mapping the movement of peoples in the transatlantic slave trade, or in convict transportations to Australia.
The what Atlantic state?
The transatlantic slave trade.
Trans slaves.
Trans slaves. Where was one? There's heaps on investigating the changes in working conditions. For example, longer working hours for low pay and the use of children as a cheap source of labor. So that was investigating the support for chartism among poorer classes. That's fine. investigating sources that record the reactions of new arrivals to other countries in this period, for example, responses to the natural environment and the climate. So all the things that we're talking about, we're relating to either terrible working conditions, the conditions in the factories and the mines, the effects on the environment, the effects on cities, all of the quasi-negative effects of the Industrial Revolution, which were minute compared to the enormous advances in the ability to lead human lives, without any there's no caveat there to talk about the fact that we now live in extraordinary wealth compared to the past. So we're talking about working conditions, how factories had really harsh working conditions. That's half of the chapters in this thing. That's, talking about how harsh factories were, how terrible people's lives were, how terrible child labor was, and how the environment has been polluted because of the Industrial Revolution. Despite the fact that, the low-paying factory jobs that we're talking about now enable people to purchase incredibly advanced things compared to what they were able to purchase in the past. The reason that child labor, it's not like child labor didn't exist prior to the Industrial Revolution. Of course, people who are starving were getting children to work on their farms for, not even slave wages because they were going to starve without them. Child labor was a product of the era, which as soon as the Industrial Revolution made it possible to be so prosperous that we didn't have to use child labor, it was stopped immediately. A family doesn't send their child to work unless it's either extremely advantageous or extremely necessary. And through the Industrial Revolution was this period of growth where it was probably a combination of both, but none of that it's talked about. It's talked about all the negative, as negative as you can be about the free market as you possibly can without acknowledging any of the benefits of the one thing that is the most pivotal when talking about the free market. And that's just an example of what the curriculum looks like, and what the curriculum focuses on is exactly everything that's the wrong way of looking at history, a completely partisan way of looking at history, a completely statist way of looking at history, and a completely quasi-Marxist leftist way of looking at history.
Do you think if we chucked status in a paddock somewhere in a dingy shed, they had to light their own fire and, make their own bread to get by, they'd learned a lesson?
Well, they'd really, really wish for the Industrial Revolution at that point. They would really be begging for their Industrial Revolution creature comforts if they were put in a pre-Industrial Revolution world. But the environment's better. Hey, the environment, there's more green grass because there isn't a factory in its place. Just absurd, completely absurd takes, which aren't objective and can only exist when there is a unilaterally decided way of looking at the world. This way of looking at the world is completely untrue. That's the problem, and that's what happens when you have a curriculum that's decided by bureaucrats, is that they can look at the world however they wish to look at the world, however they wish to portray the world. And this is taught to every single year 9 in the entire country. Every single year 9 in the entire country goes through schooling believing that the Industrial Revolution was this difficult period that was mostly bad for mankind and gave us a few benefits, but actually provided a lot of hard times. Of course, everyone's way of looking at the world is going to be skewed when they look at one of the most pivotal moments in human history this way. There's no surprise that everyone comes out of school at 18 and votes green and is retarded on economics.
And at that age as well, you're so easily convinced. It's anything, whether it is teachers and curriculum or just rumors and friends telling stupid stories. At that age, you just believe everything.
Yes. Well, and that's the other thing, is that the role that a teacher plays for students is that of the authority figure and the knowledgeable figure. So as much as students will be disrespectful and they'll stuff around and they'll get bored and they'll play up, at the end of the day, they don't doubt that their teacher is correct on the things they're teaching them and knowledgeable. They couldn't perceive of the idea that their teacher is lying to them, unless they have some other influence at home. Maybe their parents are dissenting voices or something.
What years or decades was the Industrial Revolution exactly?
So it was the end of the 1700s.
End of 1700s.
That's when it started. It went for a
Yeah.
while. Like
Yeah,
it went
yeah.
for sort of ramped up for a while, but it was the end of the 1700s.
Yeah, okay. So it was over quite a long period of time there.
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say,
I
I was just thinking, I was like, I wonder if anybody came out of the Industrial Revolution, lived in it, and was just like, this is shit. Nobody.
Well, yeah, it went for over generation periods
Yeah.
of time, like from zero to the end point. But I mean, no one living in it's kind of credited with finishing around the time of the First World War. That's kind of when the
Okay.
Industrial Revolution was credited. Is generally talked about having finished. I mean, these things are all, you know, when exactly does something start and finish, and when it's a grand movement like this is difficult to say. But yeah, you can guarantee that no one in post World War I era was looking with envy back at the 1700s pre-industrial revolution times. Like that's no doubt at all, objectively. The only reason that there can be some discussion around it now is because we are in such a distant future by comparison that we can sort of talk about gray areas that don't exist, and we can sort of fudge the truth and manipulate it and look at it in different through different lights, because we have the advantage of living in a world that has benefited from the Industrial Revolution.
Well, it'll be interesting to, in like, obviously we won't be around in hundreds of years, but, you know, look back at like the time of now, and, you know, there's technology, we can prove what's happened. Like history is a lot easier to be recorded. Whereas, you know, these gray areas about the Industrial Revolution, like you can fudge it completely. There's no way to prove that this did or didn't happen in a sense. But with like the, you know, what would you say we're in now? Like technological revolution?
My point is, I suppose it's not that you can't prove what happened during the Industrial Revolution and the great advancements that happened during.
You can't disprove the negatives.
They are completely proven, like beyond reasonable doubt and measure. You can misinterpret them.
Yeah.
And then you can teach your misinterpreted version. Like you can interpret anything in history as anything. But in fact, all of history is basically just an argument between people on how to look at it. There's no part of history that isn't contentious between some people. But if you teach your distorted misinterpretation of history as fact to everyone, then they're going to have a distorted, misinterpreted view of the world. And that is essentially what the curriculum does, is it teaches someone's interpretation of the way the world is, an interpretation which is harmful, an interpretation which is wrong, and it compulsorily teaches it to everyone across the country for the indefinite future. But you asked me earlier, the what's the solution to this?
Well, before you jump into that, I was going to quickly, this might even answer your question a little bit. Answer the question I was going to ask you. Is you've got a curriculum written by unelected bureaucrats. So you've got, you know, they'll be elected into government somehow, but then, you know, they're handed a position, which is like, you know, Minister for Education. Is there a way within our democracy to have a vote on who gets which ministerial position in the future? Do you think that's a way we could change it? So you say, okay, all these people are elected, but it's up to the public to vote and say, I think this is the most qualified person to be the education minister.
It's not even people who are elected to ministerial positions and then put in charge of education. It's the appointments that they've made, or the appointments that someone. It's not anyone who's ever been elected who is making these decisions. These are complete lifelong bureaucrats who've worked either in the education system or around government, who then get appointed to these positions and put in these committees to decide these things. It's not, and in the current democratic system, there is no way to touch curriculum, basically.
Well, with that being shut down, how do you change it from the inside, Pietro?
You can't change it from the inside. You change it from the outside. So the vast majority of teachers, there's a good portion of teachers who aren't, completely beholden to the state, and who are teaching sound things in their schools, but they're not a majority. In fact, they're not even a vocal minority. They're a quiet minority, because you kind of do it in your own independent classroom, separate of anyone else, and you kind of keep your head down, because you can't go against the broader grain of what the curriculum is set and what the school broadly purports to be its views. But what needs to happen for there to be, so there is possibility to within your own work for teachers to be conscientious and to teach their own classrooms the way that they want to teach, and that's largely what I try to do. And it's not anything groundbreaking. It's just, instead of teaching woke stuff, instead of giving woke examples to talk about argument analysis, I might give them examples about inflation or something. Talk about something that is not a cultural left woke issue.
What years do you teach?
Currently 7s, 8s, and 10s. But
do any of them ever
fight
fight back when you like give those examples, like inflation?
I'll give you an example. In one of my classes, we're doing argument analysis. So that I'd give them articles or things, and they would analyze them to see what the author's argument is. So this was the examples that the school had prepared for us were examples that largely had lots of the wokey type stuff in it. Your climate change, your The Voice, your whatever, the cultural left stuff that are used to play identity politics and to push statist agendas. And so every time there was something that was woke or cultural left or whatever as an article given, I would instead give them an article on inflation in my class. And it started happening so often that the students cottoned onto this, and they said, Mr. Angley, you really hate inflation, don't you? Why do we keep reading stuff about inflation? And it wasn't that I was giving them this much stuff, and I was just trading it in every time that there was a woke article. So they were so attuned to the fact that there was so much stuff on inflation, because that is how much stuff the school had prepared for us to teach on woke ideas that are not in any way neutral or non-partisan or left or greeny leaning. But so to wrap around, the solution to this is that the entire education system could be fixed if it was subjected to market forces. Now, how we get to this level, obviously the Lib Dems and libertarians more broadly advocate for school choice as like a middle way, where instead of completely stopping subsidizing publicly subsidizing schools, you move to a system where you still subsidize education, you just give it directly to the student, and you let the students select which schools to go to, and schools need to be able to divert from the Australian curriculum. In this way, parents and students could then choose which schools they want to go to based on which ones align with their views or what they want their kids to learn. They could have a look at the curriculum, and they could have.
And if they want, if they want a status curriculum, they can have it. If that's what they want, that's fine. We can all live in harmony.
Many would, and possibly, probably the majority would, but there'd be at least an escape hatch. Whereas your economic conservatives or whatever else, whatever dissenting view, your religious groups or whatever, could send their kids to a separate school that aligns with their views. And this introduction of the market would be a sort of midway point into breaking up the hegemony. The end point would be completely introducing market forces. If you imagine a world where there is no government, scary as it may be, first of all, everyone has double the amount of income that they currently have. Everyone has twice the amount of money. Second thing that happens is that schools become incredibly cheaper because all of the waste is cut because schools are now competing against each other in a free market. Okay, you have heaps more money and schools cost way less. And because there's now a competitive market, there is a far greater choice of schools. Anyway, this would be kind of the end game into dismantling the hegemony of the state over education, which would be, in this system here, schools and their curriculums would be subject to whether people want to actually learn them. And that's kind of what everything should be subject to in the entire world, whether people are willing to pay for the service you're providing, not whether a service is compulsory and then regulated and then given to you for free, which is a complete departure from any sort of anything. So that's kind of the end game. And school choice, which interestingly enough, school choice wasn't even being talked about. Like it was being talked about. Milton Friedman loved school choice in the US. You kind of, and I think his name's Corey DeAngelis in the US currently has managed to make really big headway. I think something like 3 states are now beginning to implement it there. And that was largely spurred on by the fact that COVID showed people in the US, parents in the US, exactly what their kids were being taught, and they were horrified. And so school choice is now kind of gaining footing there, which is a great sign, because school choice is something that could very easily be implemented anywhere. You couldn't really like you could sell it to lefties because they're not losing anything. All they lose is their grip on being able to teach everyone what they think is the truth, which some of them do cling to, but you could still sell it to them anyway. And you could very quickly dismantle the complete control that the state has, at least over high schools. Universities is more difficult to dismantle just like that. You'd have to just completely shut them off, completely shut off any government interference in them whatsoever.
Hey, something I see quite often is videos from the US where, you've got teachers, or there's like a big school board meeting with teachers and the parents, and there's just videos and the parents just like ripping into the teachers for things the kids are being taught. Do we do that in Australia? Do we have like open board meetings where parents can attend?
I don't think
schools
so.
even have boards in Australia?
No, schools do have boards. I don't.
Okay.
I don't think that they're quite as there is quite that same dynamic there. I don't think that they have parents go to. Well, they might. I don't actually know exactly. I know that in the US that was very much more highlighted because I think their curriculum there had actually leaned probably even more openly woke status leftist than ours has even got to. We kind of wait for the US to do something and then lean in that direction.
One thing you find with everything in the US is it's just so like extreme on both sides of the spectrum. Like, the left-wing status agenda is extreme, and then you've got like the complete opposite conservative right-wing agenda so extreme, and there's just no middle ground. There's no open discussion. It's just shit fight.
Yes, and it's because the state controls everything, so you have to get in a shit fight over who controls the state, because otherwise it's a win all lose all game. Like the solution to everyone coexisting is to make the state way less powerful, and then you can just do your own thing. But when there is this concentration of power, whether it be in schools or in government departments, then you have to win that power, otherwise you lose everything. There's a big libertarian movement in the US and broadly even conservative, is to starting getting really involved in your really local community politics and getting people who you agree with elected to school boards. That's how deep the sort of culture wars thing has gotten to there, because these school boards do determine these things. And therefore having, someone of your viewpoint or someone who's, more libertarian or whatever on a school board actually can have an impact on at least one school. And that's sort of as decentralized. And that there's a big push in the US, I think also by the Libertarian Party there, for that kind of activism.
Cool. Awesome.
Cool. Have you learned everything you needed to learn today, Max?
What's a school?
You know what? You've actually asked very thoughtful questions, and you didn't put your hand up once, which is usually not a great sign. But you are also the only student in the class. My
one gold star has just been revoked.
Nah, I'll leave you the gold star. You the gold star. You can't. Yeah, you got to be nice to the
to the retarded student.
I was about to say to the dumb kid in the class, but you're not the dumb kid. I was just talking about how good you were. To the stellar student. Today you are both the number one graduate of the class and also the worst student in the class. So
thank you. Thank you. Hey, in year 12, I got the highest score in my school for media, and I got an award for it. There were two kids in the class. Me and one other.
And you're putting it to great use now because you've got a podcast running. I bet that other kid doesn't have a fucking podcast running. Exactly. Yeah, where's his fucking podcast? That's why he's number 2. That's why he didn't get any award. Did he get a participation award? That's
no.
Wow. Imagine finishing second and getting nothing.
I know, right? Sucks. Not even a silver medal.
It's almost like the real world.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Sweet. Well, I didn't win anything when I was in high school, so you've got one up on me there.
Hell yeah.
And I haven't won anything since. So
that's doom and gloom.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll win hearts and minds eventually. That's what we're still ranting about the education system and everything that's wrong. Hey, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking, like this episode, really, like not like I've said anything all that controversial, but like if all of the powers that be in my school and the education system and stuff, if any of them are one of our two mums and watches our podcast, I could possibly get into some hot water about talking all this shit about the education system. And it would be really ironic if they were to fire me. I mean, no, not ironic. Sorry, it makes much more sense for them to fire me now over this than fire me a year ago when they did over the mandates and stuff. So at least I'd be earning my my exoneration this way.
You know, those days at school, like might be the last day before school holidays, end of term, and the teacher would be like, "Yeah, let's just watch a movie today." Can you do that, but then put this episode on?
I could, but I would no. I see. I would never want my students to know I have a podcast because they'd learn something. In fact, I wouldn't mind.
Kids can be cruel.
If they
They'd pull it apart and just hang shit on you.
Well, they just it would just be the fact that I have one that by itself. No, you know what? I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind if they learned about it, but I definitely wouldn't show it in class. I'd just tell them about it.
Nice. Awesome.
I'll let them ask the questions. Cool. All right. Well, that's all for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this different kind of educational spin on the series. I think we are planning on doing a couple more in the future. If you don't follow us already, follow us on Instagram, like us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Spotify. I've just said every possible word for every possible platform. So if I can just do the thing on the thing, that's what I want.
Just make sure your volume's not on mute while you're listening to us. It's a very bad mistake to make.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Catch you later.
Bye.
Au revoir.